The structure of today's miracle, in fact, both of them, the one with Elisha and the one with Christ, the structure follows that of a sacrifice. That structure is as follows. We offer a gift, offer something to God, God takes it, God transforms it, and then God gives back. Much more than we gave. That structure, if you think about the gospel, there's a little boy and he's got a few fish and a couple loaves of bread, gives it to Jesus. There's an act of faith there. Jesus multiplies it and then returns it and feeds 5,000. Pretty good return on that investment, wouldn't you say? It's also true with Elisha and his instruction. It's true in general that God does great things, but he chooses, doesn't have to, he chooses to involve us and our cooperation. He involved Mary and her yes in the incarnation. Just think, if Paul had not said yes to the challenge at his conversion, we would have a big hole in the New Testament, wouldn't we? In many other places, we see, for example, even at the end of Christ's life, where God the Father challenged him to give himself. Remember at the Garden of Gethsemane, Christ pleaded, "Not my will," pleaded to take this cup from me, and then eventually said, "Not my will, but yours be done." At that moment, he offered himself. Then Christ took him, or God the Father took him at the crucifixion, transformed him, gave him a glorified body, and then gave him back to us, resurrected at the resurrection, with that glorified body. What a gift. What a transformation. I think it's important for us to meditate on what it is that we need to give God to enable or to allow God to do great things. It requires generosity. If you think about it, most of the work is being done by God. It's just we do the first part, offer the gift, and then it's God takes it, God transforms it, God gives back. The heavy lifting is done not by us, but by God, although we think it costs us a lot sometimes, so we have to sacrifice a lot, and it is sometimes. An example. There are millions, perhaps billions, of people who are starving on this earth. If we could find a way to give up some of what we have and feed them, it would be a wonderful, wonderful thing. Everybody deserves to eat, don't you think? Every human. Now, that's a very, very complicated issue. But there are people both who won't give up what they have from the wealthy side, and also people in the places where people are starving. Some of the leaders, any food you gave to them would end up in their storehouses instead of being given to the poor people. So we need to work out the logistics of it. But some people think that there is enough food for everyone to eat in the whole earth. It's just that we would have to give up some of ours, just like the boy gave up his 2 loaves of fish. We have later a collection. There is a second collection, by the way, for the Vincent de Paul to help the poor. If you give a little, you run the risk, you enable God to do a lot. It's a good thing to help others. I know we live in a country with great abundance. The Father Greg Schaefer, who just died within the last few months, was a missionary in Guatemala, and he describes one day in his life where he left Guatemala. He was up in the mountains in a lake called Atitlan in San Lucas. And the people are very poor up there, but happy, and they typically take corn from their home, which they have grown. We would call it volunteer corn. Looks like it's growing wildly, but they harvest it, and then they take it to town, have it ground, and then they go home and make meal for their family. And at 3 or 4 in the morning, he was leaving to go on vacation, and someone was driving him, and he drove around in one of these mountainous roads, dirt roads, and there was a woman walking the other direction, and she was surprised by the car that came around the corner, and she jumped to get out of the way and dropped her corn on the ground. Now, Father Schaefer realized this was the family's meal for the day. So he backed up, they shone the light on the ground, and he and his driver helped her pick out the corn from the road, from the ground, did the best they could, and then they went on their way. He caught his flight. He went home to Minnesota, drove, and on his way home, in southern Minnesota, he drove through a little town which had a grain bin, and the grain bin had been overflowing, and the corn flowed over the road so that he couldn't drive on the road. If he could have beamed that corn down to Guatemala, he would have. Who wouldn't? We have so much it can overflow over the road, and they have barely enough to eat. We haven't figured that out yet. But it starts with the person and the persons, the people who are generous enough to give up something for the sake of something greater, to give God something in their lives, out of their wealth or even out of their poverty. It works in relationships. It works in many, many different respects. The Mass is a sacrifice. It follows the same structure I outlined. We bring our gifts of bread and wine, maybe some bucks. The priest representing God takes them, blesses them, consecrates them, transforms them into the body and blood of Christ, and then gives them back. Pretty good investment, huh? It is the way the sacrifice works. It's the way we invite God into our lives. And we can do this because we are a royal priesthood. We are a holy nation, as the preface will say. We are, through our baptism, able not only to watch the sacrifice happen, but to participate in it. I like to say to the confirmation kids, if you're not offering the sacrifice of the Mass, if you're not participating, it's like having a Porsche in the garage and never taking it out. Unthinkable. But you have the capacity by dint of your baptism to offer this sacrifice. My priesthood is justified by your need to offer the sacrifice. And your need to offer the sacrifice justifies my priesthood. So we all go to God together. And so what you do is you put, along with the bread and wine, you put your intentions. You pray for your loved ones. You pray for your child who seems to be losing his or her faith. You pray for your grandmother who's in the hospital and is ill. You pray for rain. You pray for whatever it is that you need, and it makes this Mass personally engaging to you. And if you do this, every time you go to Mass, you develop a relationship with Jesus Christ, your Savior, a bond. And then you sit and you watch what the Lord does with your offerings, but you have to give God something to work with. Let us go to the altar. And I think the question at the end of this homily is, what are you bringing to the sacrifice of the Mass today? To give to God, to be transformed.